The floor is yours, mate. Fire away. I'll
Hi, everyone.
enable screen sharing if you need it.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks. I think I was just going to kind of give a bit of a chat, kind of keep it simple. But yeah, thanks for having me this evening. I think Roddy introduced me to James. So Roddy got in contact with me, um, I guess a couple of months ago, and we've been talking stuff through. So that's kind of how this all came about. But essentially, I run a social enterprise based down in Edinburgh called Bluebird Exchange. And essentially, what we're trying to do is encourage reuse of outdoor equipment and clothing. And then once we do that through, well, a couple of ways really. So we have an online marketplace which is dedicated to outdoor equipment. So that's kind of inclusive of snow sports stuff. For a bit of context, I was chatting to James about this before, but I come from a bit of a snow sports background, so that's kind of how I ended up doing this. So maybe it's probably slightly more snow sports focused than just general outdoor focused. And we also accept donations of outdoor kit, which we resell. And we use our profits, because we're a social enterprise, we use our profits to invest in kind of environmental initiatives, and we actually do some social access projects as well. So one of the social access projects we're running at the moment is an initiative called Kids Go Free. And that's when we receive donations of children's clothing, we're working with kind of like local outdoor providers and local authorities and local schools to redistribute those items free of charge. And I mean, that's pretty much it. One of the main things that kind of we're all about is this idea of moving towards a circular economy for outdoor clothing and equipment. But that's a bit deep. I won't kind of get into it at this level. It was more just kind of to say hi, kind of give you a heads up of what we're doing. And yeah, we kind of, at the moment, we're limited to our local area being Edinburgh for like donations wise, etc. But as things open up, we're hoping to kind of expand into like the wider Scotland area. So it was just a quick one for me to say kind of what we're up to. And I guess if you've got any questions, one thing I was actually really interested in speaking to you, James, maybe about is that we work with a partner in France, and they've just been running an initiative. Well, it's not an initiative. They've received donations from a snow sports school in France of the old uniforms, because every year, so one of the schools is out in Morsey, and it's called like Mint Snowboarding, and they've received like all of their old jackets and stuff like that. So I actually just had a question about whether Glencoe have any kind of excess stock or any old uniforms that you're either not using, or if you are using, kind of like what you do with that sort of stuff at its end of life, because quite a lot of what we do is just about like either extending the life cycle. So if you've
Yeah,
got
yeah.
anything.
Well, generally speaking, by the time we're done with it, I don't think anyone would want it. But
Fair enough.
and we use we have a sort of tiered system of jacket usage. You know, the ones we try to use, the ones we'll probably use, and then the ones we use if we've run out of jackets.
Yeah.
So yeah, but on a practical note, say somebody wanted to donate like a jacket. Is it just jackets, or is it also like
No,
salopettes or snowboard pants?
so it's kind of all outdoor
Yeah.
gear and equipment. So no, equipment and clothing. So we kind of take a real range of stuff. So at the moment, like we've got a bunch of sleeping bags that have just come
Cool.
through. We've also we've started, because I live in like a coastal bit of Edinburgh, so we've got like lots of like neoprene stuff. So we've got loads of like weight
Okay.
boots and stuff like that. So
Sure.
we're kind of pretty broad for
Anything outdoor sports
outdoor
orientated.
gear.
And what would be the best way if somebody wants to donate a jacket or whatever, how would they get in touch with you? What would be the best way
Well,
to
so
get in?
on our website, there's a section on our website. So there's a little form on the website, and you just fill in like a couple of details about like your name, your email address, and like kind of what the item is. And then we just drop you an email, and we just kind of work out best way to do it. At the moment, we've been doing it because we've kind of been stuck in our local area and cycling around, picking stuff up around Edinburgh over the past like 3 or 4. But kind of as we open up, we've kind of got other channels because obviously it's further away.
Well, maybe we could do like a pre-season or mid-season event, Glencoe Mountain, where people bring in their old gear, and you know, do it on a one particular day where you can come up, visit, and take home a truckload of stuff or something. You know,
that would be a really good initiative. One of the things that we were planning last year, but because of COVID, it got all thrown out of whack, was to run like an outdoor clothes swap. Whereby people obviously, like, if you've got a jacket, you've kind of you don't want anymore, but
gear exchange kind of thing.
It's just a gear exchange, and essentially you get an allocated token based on the value of your product, and then you can swap for an equivalent.
It's an idea I've thought about myself. I think it's a great idea, and so let's tell you what, when you get the chance, ping me on Facebook Messenger like the details, and I'll pass that on to the staff so they can get a fuller picture of how to get in touch with yourself and donate their stuff. And so
absolutely. Yeah, kind of the entire premise is just to encourage reuse, and then just use the profits to do something beneficial for the outdoor community, really.
Smashing. Stops it going to landfill, and that's always good. And this stuff's almost always made from plastic of some shape or form, so the longer it can stay used for, the better. And so thanks, Stephen, much appreciated. And you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the session. I'll leave it entirely up to you. The session this evening is on something called creative swiping, and the idea is taking ideas from other places and applying it to your scenario as a sort of method of getting through life in general, but applied specifically to snow sports. So it should hopefully be useful to pretty much anyone, especially somebody who does sports or coaches sports, and especially if you're a ski or snowboard instructor. So your choice. I wouldn't take it personally if you don't want to stick around, but you're very welcome to do so.
Well, I did promise my girlfriend we would have a barbecue this evening. So I think I'll be in trouble if I stayed on, unfortunately. Sure, but I do really appreciate you having me on, James, and Roddy, thanks for the introduction. I'm sure we'll chat soon, no doubt. Roddy's been full of good ideas for the project, which has been really helpful.
Cool. Brilliant.
So, James,
cheers, Stephen.
Thank you very much. And
see you later.
I'll speak to you soon, no doubt.
All right. Bye. Thanks very much. Yes. Bye. All right, folks. So the session I timed out about 25 minutes of content. So we'll see how long it takes with a few questions here and there. You're very welcome to interrupt at any time with, stick your hand in the air, just unmute, etc., etc. However you want to interrupt is fine by me. Can everyone see the slides there? Anyone just unmute and say yes or no?
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, cool. Smashing. Well, so this idea I came across, in some shape or form when I was an instructor from years gone by. Stealing from the best has always been the sort of way of operating for most instructors, or at least stealing from other people. But it's a concept that I encountered and I'm doing part-time management course, and recently read a book on talent, developing talent, and I thought they worked really well together. So I'm going to do a session on just that. And creative swiping is a bit like if you've seen Home Alone 2, it's like the Sticky Bandits. And I'm just going to play a little clip from Home Alone 2 to kind of get the idea across. So skip in a little bit here. So we are going to try and be like the Sticky Bandits. Imagine you've covered your hand in tape and you're going to steal some stuff. That's the idea. And if my slides will move forward without playing the video again, the idea is to kind of innovate like a burglar. And if you've ever heard of KIP, it's a innovative school program out in the US. Started off in California, and they work with inner city kids to try and get them to college, basically. And you know, their method is to just go in and raid the joint. Basically, as they say, go back, take the kitchen sink as well. The difference is we're not just wholesale taking everything and mixing it together at random. So we're going to take all these various ideas and I'm going to throw quite a few at you, and you can kind of just take whatever you like and leave the rest that don't make sense to you. But these tiny little bits here and there can add up to big difference. Those of you who are from Britain have almost definitely heard of George's Marvelous Medicine. Very quickly, George basically just adds he's trying to make his grandma's cough medicine or something, and he adds everything he can find into this big pan in the kitchen, stirs it together, gives it to his grandma, and she grows to like 50 feet tall and bursts through the house. So it kind of went wrong. Whereas out in the US, there's, I don't know if they're still around, but there's Presidio theatres, I think that's how it's pronounced. And what they did is they handpicked the sound from a cinema that they went to, and they saw really amazing sound. They handpicked the chairs that are like Italian leather or something like that. And so they took all these separate ingredients, but they only stole from the best. They didn't just randomly pick things and put them together like, I don't know, beetroot and popcorn, you know, like they actually thought about it and picked what they wanted from it. So we're not just randomly grabbing willy-nilly. It's not Supermarket Sweep, if you've ever seen that TV show from the 1990s where they just raid the superstore. It's specific, on purpose, particular things. And you know what I'm gonna kind of encourage you to do is experiment a bit with this. You know, there's all sorts of ideas that are going to come your way over the next sort of 20 minutes. When you go to put them into practice, almost certainly at some point it's not going to go quite right. Maybe like George's Marvelous Medicine, I doubt that you grow somebody to 50 feet tall and they'll burst through a house, but it's worth mentioning that something called intelligent fast failure is expecting things to potentially go wrong, not quite go exactly as you had planned, but to just not worry about it too much. Just go, okay, well, that didn't work. You know, you say you've done one lesson or one coaching session, you tried something, didn't work. But it doesn't mean you necessarily dump it entirely. You maybe just tweak it slightly the next time. But the key thing is just getting back up after a failure and moving on and adapting as you go. So what are we going to creatively swipe? What are we going to steal? In inverted commas. Well, we're going to steal from this book here, The Talent Code. It's a brilliant book if you ever get the chance to read it. And it covers 3 sections. There's deep practice, ignition, and master coaching. And we're just going to go through each of them over the next sort of 20 minutes. And like I say, there'll be a lot of different ideas, and just steal whatever you like. This is where either feel free to watch the YouTube video afterwards, or have a wee notepad and scribble down something that just sort of clicks for you, and feel free to steal away. That's the whole idea. You're just watching this and thinking, genius, I'm having that, I want this. Go back, take the kitchen sink if you want to. Just quick drink here. So the whole book is based on research that came out about 10 years ago now, that skill is not born. You're not born with talent. You grow it. Literally, you grow it. This molecule called myelin wraps your nerve fibers, and the more wraps that there are, the stronger the circuit is, the faster it fires, the more coordinated it is. And so what we're doing is trying to stimulate that, I think it's a fat, to grow. How do we do that? We do it with something called deep practice. And this is where the author Daniel starts off by talking about chicken wire Harvards. Harvard's university out in America. I'm sure probably most people have heard of it. It's a fairly famous place. It's a prestigious educational institution. The idea of a chicken wire Harvard is a bit like if you've ever worked in Scotland at a Scottish ski resort or one of the artificial slopes. It's very much not neat, clean, tidy, perfect. It's a little bit rough. It's a little bit ghetto, and especially if you've ever ridden one of the plastic slopes, it's particularly ghetto sometimes. I remember at one of the ones in Glasgow getting rocks thrown at me from behind the Gabion baskets at Bellahouston. These things happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And the strange thing is when this guy Daniel researched some of the hotbeds of development of sport, so like football in Brazil, tennis in Russia, and so forth, he found that these hotbeds of the talent development weren't like Harvard. They were much more like chicken wire Harvards. They were rough and ready, like the football development places, concrete pitches and things like that. It wasn't grass, you know? And so the idea is that, generally speaking, this molecule myelin grows when people are pushed in the right kind of way. And that almost always seems to be not this perfect institution, but actually something a little bit rough and ready. And especially in Scotland and Britain in general, with snow sports facilities being, let's say, just not the best in the world most of the time, making the most of what you got, you can go really quite far with it, and it's worth bearing that in mind. So, sorry, that picture always cracks me up. The another way of pushing through deep practice is something that in the book they call it the Clarissa zone. So the Clarissa is this young woman who's learning to play the flute, and the book talks about when she was practicing, and she does something that they've called deep practice, where she practices the hard parts, the really challenging bits. And in a period of, I think it's something like 6 minutes, she does a huge amount of practice compared to how other people tend to practice. And this naturally in my head reminded me of Tropic Thunder, if you've ever seen it, where they stick the actors in a sort of jungle combat situation, but the actors think it's not really real, but it actually is real. That's the funny part. But the idea is you stick people in these really challenging situations, and their brains have to respond to that challenge. They're doing the difficult part, and maybe we're not going to get dumped in the jungle in the middle of Vietnam or something like that. But the idea is that struggle and challenge are not roadblocks to development, they're actually the way of developing. So if your brain is firing off signals in response to challenges, this deep practice, you learn much quicker from that experience. Now, it's not necessarily a pleasant experience to be in that kind of really challenging environment, hence why it's sort of bittersweet taste. I'm sure we've all been there where it's really challenging. It's not necessarily straight up pleasant, but you're really growing really fast. You know, you're developing. And so that's part of what this deep practice section the book talks about. And I'm sure for a lot of you, you can imagine what this looks like. So for example, I was coaching a ski team out in California, and we went to the magic carpet, the basic bunny slope, and we took off one ski, and we tried to get the hang of one ski skiing. And this was with like 6 to 12-year-old kids, and then when we went back out to the slopes with two skis on, suddenly everything was a lot easier. Things like that would be potential routes that you could take for this sort of Clarissa zone. It's worth bearing in mind you're not always doing your students a favor by making it as easy as possible. So if these brain circuits don't fire, you don't get wrapped in myelin, they don't build skill. Especially true perhaps for people in a season-long coaching program rather than a one-off instructor session. What might these challenges look like? Well, if anyone plays football, if you're American soccer, there's something called futsal, which is what people in Brazil put together as a sort of harder version of football. The ball's smaller, it's heavier, it's a smaller court, smaller goals. everything's more challenging, and it's all happening really, really fast. And that's where, you know, Brazil football teams have been some of the best in the world for an extended period of time. That might be things like artificial slopes, you know, where you can ride year round so you can keep building your skill. Might be things like if anyone's trying to backflip, probably done it into an airbag first. Maybe we could have ski simulators. I think there's one out there where you're in sort of rubber bands and you can sort of ski side to side. I'm sure probably we've all tried trampolines. These sort of things, it's worth considering what would be the snowboard equivalent, say, of futsal. What would that be? Don't know. But again, this is the idea: is you creatively swipe futsal from soccer, football, and you go, right, what would be the skiing equivalent of that? If anyone's ever seen the movie Turbo, it's about a snail that gets struck by lightning, or I think drinks some Red Bull or something like that, and suddenly can go at like the speed of sound. It's a pretty funny movie if you get the chance to watch it. Hence the snail that's going fast in the background. One of the things that emerged when this guy Daniel went to look at these chicken wire Harvards was that quite often they really broke down the learning process to make it almost excruciating slow. So like at Meadowhurst School of Music, they spent 3 hours on one sheet of music, you know. It's amazing how much it can make a difference to do something very, very slowly. And actually, when I was training out in Tahoe to try and pass the Ski 3, my trainer, a guy called Mike, got us to do parallel turns as slowly as we could as development, because you don't have momentum on your side then. And that's part of the reason why I think especially plastic slopes are particularly good for building skill, is because the high friction scenario takes away the momentum, which makes it a lot harder to do your turns. And so it's worth considering how slow can you practice something. And it occurred to me just briefly, if anyone's seen the slow-mo guys on YouTube, they use super slow-mo to break down stuff. Wouldn't it be amazing to watch your own performance in super slow-mo? Kind of thing that wouldn't have been possible till recently, but perhaps nowadays your average smartphone could do it. Go for it, Kim.
Our trainer used to get us see the videos that he would see with an iPhone, how you can, if it's paused, you can move it along. Like when it's not
frame
playing,
by frame.
he used to get us to do that and watch until you noticed what you had done wrong. Because you couldn't really see it. I feel like a trainer has, I don't know, he can think something, you could pick something bad, whether I couldn't see it, just because he's like a level 4 basic trainer. He knows what he's seeing until you play it on the frame and you see it and you're like, well, I didn't even think I did that. Do you know what I mean? Like until you actually watch it and you're like, oh. Like he didn't look that, but do you get what I'm saying? Sorry, I feel like you're rambling.
Definitely, and that's where if you can, if you still do the movement correctly in slow-mo, you know you've really got it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the idea is about. Slow is fast. So there's section 2 of the book, and again, remember, we are trying to steal whatever isn't nailed down. And to be honest, information for the most part isn't nailed down. You can put something into practice and it's not copyrighted, you know. So the second section we're looking at, things that we can creatively swipe from this book, the talent code, is ignition. And that's just the idea is you're sparking passion in people. And just as an example from myself personally, so I had, it's interesting hearing Stephen talking about the fact that he broke his femur and recovering from injury. I had my ankle reconstructed just over 2 years ago, and I had to have 2 surgeries to get it sort of back to normal. And while I was going through the intense physiotherapy to do that, I found this video really quite inspirational for sort of recovering from injury. So just as a case in point, I'll play you this video. You know, the idea is it's inspiring, and you can see why, as a person who's suffering from injury, recovering from injury, why that'd be relevant to me think about what the equivalent would be for you. Awesome. That bit where she's doing a massive pistol squat on a knee that's like all scarred is like particularly inspiring for me, you know, recovering from injury. And granted, I'll never be as good as Kiersar. But, you know, the idea is something along the lines of, if you take golf, the book uses the example of golf. If you go about 20 years back, there were no South Korean female golfers at the pro level. And then one woman won, or did, I think, either won it or ranked very highly in one of the pro golf tournaments. And then gradually over the last 20 years, they've come to dominate golf, South Korean female golfers, because of that initial inspiration. And the same is true of a number of sports. And it's worth considering how important anyone's learning is, that passion. And that passion doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. And inspirational writing, relevant role models, a big part to play in that. Kim, were you going to say something?
I was just kind of thinking, I don't know if it's kind of off topic, but kind of to do with like the inspiration. Like, so obviously I'm from Paisley, which is a bit of a, I'm not going to say rough, but it's not a very nice place. It's not a nice place, and nobody really knows anybody that skis. And because I came through snow camp, everybody's like, oh, I thought, you know, it was a really posh sport, and it was really, you need to have lots of money. And I think, see now, like, there's lots of people that aren't pure minted, they can ski. I think it is to do with a lot of, like, not inspirational, but like a lot of people you see that are not like parents that are loddy haw as such. If you get what I'm saying. Kind of like,
especially in Britain, you don't have to be made of money to give it a shot in home soil.
Yeah.
Big time.
But I think in Paisley, like, a lot of people say to me, Kim, you're the only person that I know in Paisley, or the only person that I know that skis. And I'm like, it's not a posh thing. I explain that. I don't know how many times I have to explain that every single, not day, but like month. I need to explain that it's not a posh thing. When I was out in my season, there was English people that weren't posh. I just think, and Paisley especially, because we're
far removed from full sort of alpine environment in the Scottish Central Belt and the UK in general. We're very much backwater for snow sports. But that doesn't mean you can't give it a go.
No, I know.
The first snowboard I ever owned, I bought used for £10, which is like $12, Carol. You know, like,
I know.
And then I used it for, I think, 3 months and sold it for £8. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And you know, I think I'm really glad for the opportunity to give it a shot when I was, you know, a lot younger on just an artificial slope at what is an old bandstand in a park in a city. Do you know what I mean? That's what Bellahouston used to be, is a bandstand.
But again, I don't think Scotland being as, I think more like places like London, where they have no snow. Like, I don't think they see snow, whether people here see snow a bit more. But still, it's like, if you mention skiing to somebody from a council, I was going to say scheme there, but I don't want to say scheme, a council estate in Paisley, they'll be like, oh man, you must live up like Bearsden. Like, they must think like you're really posh, and it's not really. I don't think it's posh.
Yeah, and also it's seen, well, it is in a lot of ways a male-dominated sport. But somebody as good a skier as Lindsay Vonn, and she's not alone in being a really good female skier, I think is really helpful in growing talent in the female side of the snow sports industry.
Yeah.
I'm going to say on the inspiration stuff and seeing people skiing, I think it's definitely seeing a mixture of people from different backgrounds and kind of knowing and having the confidence to say, well, you know, that it's fine to not all be from the same background. I think that
Yeah.
I mean, I think places, I suppose, roundabout where there are facilities. I'm thinking particularly about council-run dry slopes. So where I'm from in Manningtree, it's like all school groups get ski lessons as part of the curriculum and stuff. So
right,
everybody skis up to a point, which I think really, I mean, unfortunately, the majority go for, you know, their ski lessons at school, and then it's like, you know, you can count on one hand how many times you've been since then. But
yeah,
just, I mean, I found that, I mean, that's kind of basically kind of how I came into skiing, and then got into race training, and it is quite a culture shock in a way, but it's good to see, you know, for whatever background you're from, to see people from other backgrounds. So I know it's just kind of going on to this topic, but I just, it's definitely an important topic.
Certainly for me, snow sports as a community was one of the most welcome communities I've experienced. And, you know, that was part of the appeal for me, as a bit of an outsider. And I immediately felt like an insider, you know, and that just spoke to me. So.
Yeah. I agree
cool.
with you.
Well, feel free to, you know, add in as we go. So on the, you know, continuing on oh no, we've watched it once. That's fine. So pro. The continuing on the idea of ignition, of igniting passion. The key thing is, if you're going to get talented at anything, and talent comes from doing challenging things repeatedly to grow that insulation in your brain to make the circuits fire quicker, more reliably, more accurately. It's an extended period of time. I'm sure you've heard of the 10,000 hour rule. And this is where grit comes in. Grit, a brilliant book by a lady called Angela Duckworth, is about tenacity, keeping on doing things and just keeping on doing things, and you just keep going. And, you know, again, if you're going to keep being passionate about something for any length of time, you need methods of doing that. Just turning up every week, yeah, that'll get you to there to a certain extent. But something like, if you've ever seen the movie Any Given Sunday, the big highlight of the movie, this speech near the end, and it's one of the best speeches I've ever seen in my entire life. It's a true source of inspiration repeatedly for me. I've probably watched the thing like 100 times, and it's this American football team that's just about to just get annihilated by the other team, and they've been falling apart for the whole movie. And then Al Pacino delivers this speech, this just super rousing speech about trying to get every inch from the game that's possible. Definitely, you know, give it a watch when you get the chance. But the idea is to just keep sticking at it and have that grit and determination to keep moving forward and to fight, and he says, to die for that inch. And, you know, I think that's got a lot, you know, there's lots of times I've gone snowboarding, I've gone skiing, and I'm like, man, this just sucks. It's not all coming together. Why do I even do this? Why don't I just give up, you know? And going, you know what? Sometimes you just got to turn up and do it anyway and keep doing it. But at the same time, sometimes you've got to jazz it up a bit. So this, again, in the book, The Talent Code, Daniel Coyle talks about there's a young girl learning to play a musical instrument, and she didn't have that spark of inspiration to begin with, but then when her music instructor played the jazz version of the song, suddenly she wanted to learn it. And I think, especially in skiing and snowboarding, we often sort of, use the freestyle version of a trick to kind of give people that ignition, that type of spark to want to do something. So determination, relevant metaphors can go a big long way. One I used again when I was coaching out in the US is there's a song that's a very rousing song called Strength of 1,000 Men from the band Two Steps from Hell. You can imagine it's not a very subtle song. And I'd get the kids, again, they're like between 6 and 12, to do like super hard carves as if they had the strength of 1,000 men. And, you know, it's just a metaphor. Obviously, they're not as strong as 1,000 people. But, you know, those metaphors can really help big time. So still on the topic of ignition, when we take a look at the feedback side of things, we can really tweak this one way or the other and have massive big difference out the other side. So this lady, Carol Dweck, to discuss, you can read the screen there, but the thing that's crazy is 6 words are all they used to pray, and both sets of kids were praised with 6 words, but one set, as you can see, were praised for the amount of effort they put in, and another for their inherent talent. And it's a massive difference. They tested them 3 times, and between the 30% increase, 20% increase, that's 50% difference, just because you either praised their inherent talent or the amount of effort they put in. And although the study wasn't done in adults, I'm sure most of us would probably take it as a given that if we continue to praise people for the effort they put in, for the passion and drive to keep going forwards, they're much more likely to stick at it and get better at it than if we tell them they're a genius, and as soon as they encounter difficulty, they think, well, I'm not a genius after all, and just give up on it. However, caveat at the end, just telling them, good job, is probably not enough.
That's an astonishing slide.
That's an astonishing slide.
That's like mind-blowing information.
It's insane. 6 words with that amount of power. It's because it taps into that fundamental root cause of deep practice is when you're doing challenging things. Challenging things require you to put in effort. And if you're talented, we don't need to put in effort, do you? Because you're talented. Whereas if skill is grown, literally, physically grown, that effort produces that reward. So put in the effort. So feel free to jump in, Carl.
I will, James.
Cool. Awesome. So the third section of the book, Talent Code, definitely worth a read. It's master coaching, and he has these 4 virtues of master coaching, and this is the last section of when I'll be talking, and we can kind of discuss some ideas out the other side of it. But here's the 4 virtues. We'll go through them one at a time. Some are very straightforward, like the matrix, a deep knowledge of the sport. That's fairly, like, you can get the idea of that pretty straightforward. The third one, GPS linked, GPS reflex, maybe take a little bit more breaking down, but we'll go through them just now. Brilliant movie, The Matrix, big fan of it. Deep knowledge bank. Interestingly, the American Structure System, PSIASI, has a website with lots of videos where people break down the movements and things, and it's called a matrix. So quite interesting there. But if you're going to get deep knowledge of the sport, I think probably most people would agree that step 1, have a look at good people riding, is going to be a easy way to begin. And if you only ever try the same thing, you're not going to have a great amount of breadth as an instructor or a coach. But that constant experimentation, expecting that there's a decent chance it will fail, but you'll try it anyway, and then you learn from the mistakes, and you know, you get better at the other side of it. It also requires a sort of maybe a selection of different types of modes. So I can't play a musical instrument to save my life. I don't have the patience for it, if I'm being honest. But I can understand that people learning to play a musical instrument, it can sound atrocious with it just ever so slightly off. And so that's a really fine-tuned skill. And those moments do happen in snowboarding and skiing. Like if you're trying to adjust your feet relative to each other, the sort of twist idea in snowboarding, that can make a huge difference with just millimeters of change in the edge. Equally, something like football, the whole pace of the game is part of the game. And yeah, you can break stuff down. It's not like that's a bad idea. But if you never actually play the game as a whole, you're never going to pick up that whole somebody turns left so you turn right, somebody turns right so you turn right, and that whole reactionary part of the sport. And I doubt any of you need convincing that snowboarding and skiing require you to react to the terrain, and sometimes the person next to you decides to ride in front of you and take you out. So snow sports is a bit of both, and your knowledge bank is going to have to incorporate those sort of elements. You'll know what you're looking at. You try different things to build a good repertoire, and you know when it's a fine skill and you're working on a fine skill, and when it's more of a sort of reactionary go kind of skill you're working on. And you'll take different approaches to get to where you're going with it. So the second virtue in master coaching, so Daniel Coyle studied some master coaches to distill this information out of it. And one of the things he noticed, I think it was in a violin coach, was that he gave a completely different session to two different people back to back. And that's where, a lot of manuals, I've got a shelf full of them, have been written on how to try and decode how somebody learns. And some of them are really useful models, some of them not so useful. We did a session a while back talking about how some of those ways we think about it are actually maybe not very up to date. But anyway, the point being, people do learn differently. And if you can adjust how you deliver that information to them, so for example, one session, this master coach needs to sort of push somebody right to the limit to really get the performance they're looking for out of them. It's almost shouting at them to get them to play the violin better. And then the next person needed sort of coached out of them, like just calm, soothing, relaxing kind of coach. And it actually reminded me of one private lesson I got when I was working out in Tahoe. A lady had requested an instructor who's going to be a hard taskmaster. And I was like, all right, okay, I'll give it a shot. I tried a different way of coaching. Sometimes you can ask them and they'll tell you, but a lot of times you have to sort of tweak it, like, okay, like you're tuning in a radio for those who are older than 25 or whatever. You kind of go through and you're like, is that it? No, a little bit back. Yeah, oh, that's it. I found the way they learn. Cool. I'll keep going with that. It does change from day to day, of course. And that requires you, like, when you fine tune a radio, you can hear whether or not it's in tune. And that's, you judge people's facial expressions, body language, things like that. Somebody shuffling their feet, they're probably fed up and they want to get moving. And then, when you see them ride, you can tell if they've actually picked up what it is you were trying to coach them. Finally, it's worth noting that probably everyone on this call can go for a snowboard, can go for a ski, and they're riding down the mountain, maybe hear something, they see something, they feel something in their own riding, and they go, oh, I'll just tweak this little bit in response to that. Like somebody tuning an instrument, like the string in a guitar. And that skill that we have is a really important skill and is really worth trying to coach into your students, whether it's a one-off session or 5 sessions, in 5 weeks or whatever. That ability to self-adjust and self-teach is that good old teach a person to fish and they'll have fish for the rest of their life, or you give them a fish, they'll eat one meal for one day. And that comes down to seeing what it is that person wants to learn and delivering it in such a way as they can continue to teach themselves. So we're nearing the end of the session, but a little bit more to go just yet. So we're looking at perceptiveness still at the moment, just to avoid confusion. And when we're delivering content to people, we need to adjust the way we deliver it to suit the task as well. So some of you might have heard of these 3 different ways of delivering a task, and I've done a little sort of visual about what that might look like. And some of them are suited to better scenarios, some not so much. So there's certain tasks where you want to add them together. So say you're teaching somebody to learn turns. First of all, you're just teaching them the actual physical act of turning. Then maybe add in a little bit of bending the legs to absorb the push at the end of the turn. And then maybe you add in things like a bit more edge control. If you're a skier, maybe a pole plant, things like that. So you gradually chain those things together to give the final product. Other times, you maybe say somebody's learning a freestyle trick and they've kind of got it, but they want to get a little bit more style on it by tweaking out a leg or something like that. You just shape it slightly as you go to give it the finished product. And at other times, you're going to need to really break it right down into separate elements. So say if you're a snowboarder and you're doing a bit of freestyle and you want to teach somebody a half cab, you're going to need to teach them how to ride switch. You're going to need to teach them how to do a nose ollie, aka a nollie, and you're also going to need to teach them how to do a 180 to do that one trick. So you break it down into its parts before then trying it as a whole. And those chunks of information allow you to break down the whole task, which would be way too big to just try for most people, into separate sections. But depending on the situation, the person you're dealing with, chunking might be one of the ways you can tap into their wherever you perceive their way of learning to be. So the third of our 4 virtues in the master coaching session that we are creatively swiping, we are stealing this. If it ain't nailed down, we're taking it. So GPS is, so Daniel Coyle is an American. In America, a sat nav is called a GPS. So that might help the Brits understand this term. So sat nav, as we call it, GPS in the US, you know, as you're driving along, it gives you commands. Turn left here, go right here, make a U-turn when possible, whatever. You know, you get the idea. It's a series of linked, vivid, just-in-time directions. And quite often when I'm training instructors, one of the things I get them to do is tell their pupil what to do in such a way as it's impossible for them to do it wrong. So, and the way we do that is by, if they leave it ambiguous, we do whatever the most absurd, ridiculous way of doing whatever they're telling us to do is. And this is where when somebody's doing something and they've got it, making a big deal of that in a genuine way is really helpful. You know, when you're pushing somebody and they're finding it challenging, you just got it. That's it. We've got it. We've got it. Do that again. And reminding them why you're pushing them and why you're challenging them, why we're aiming to do a particular skill. Maybe you broke it down in separate segments, you build it back up again. Is they're trying to achieve something, whatever that might be. Maybe they're doing a race and they want to be faster. Maybe they are not as fit because they've been stuck in the house during COVID and they want to be a more efficient rider. Not quite ride so intensely, but just chill, go with the flow a little bit more. You might get all of those people in one lesson. If you end up teaching a lot of beginner lessons, often it's a large group of people, and you'll have a whole mixed bag in there. And it's really helpful, but challenging, to give a different type of feedback to each customer, a different way of coaching to each customer, if you can. It's also worth considering, remember when we go back to section 1, where it's about deep learning. Once somebody's got something, it's often best not to just move on and try something different, but to really get that skill in deep, to fire those nerves in the brain to build that wrapping so they fire quicker, more reliably, more accurately. And that would be things like, say you're building the ability to absorb bumps. don't just do it in the sort of lesson scenario, but go find some bumps on the mountain, different shapes, different sizes. Some of it's in the shade, some of it's in the sun. Really get that skill in deep. Sorry, a bit thirsty. It's also worth considering that if somebody succeeds at something, brilliant, get in. You don't just stop there. So say you're learning to play a musical instrument, you get the various chords or whatever, 4 chords and the truth. You don't just stop there, you develop as a musician. Same in skiing and snowboarding. If you can ride a green trail, well, brilliant. You've built your edge control skills to where you can do that. Does that mean you want to just stop there? No, it's a building block to move forward from. So last but not least, theatrical honesty. And this is where, I don't know if has anyone, who's heard of Glenn Plake? Anyone heard of Glenn Plake?
That's going back a ways.
Yeah, so Glenn Plake is a freestyle skier from maybe the 70s, 80s, that kind of time. And he has a very distinctive, about 1.5 to 2 foot long mohawk, and it's like punk skier style, and amazing, just phenomenal rider. And he has this sort of, badass reputation, really.
He's actually an examiner now.
It's amazing to consider that he's gone all the way through the American instructor system. I walked past him actually at Mammoth in Tao while he was on the ski training side, I was on the snowboard side. And I was like, did I just walk past Glenn Blake? I think I did. But, he has this sort of panache about him. And I'm sure some of the people that made the biggest impressions on you were almost a little bit larger than life. There's a book you can get about teaching children to ski called Captain Zembo's Teaching Kids to Ski. I forget what the exact title of the book is, but it's about a guy called Captain Zembo. And, he's built this sort of persona for himself. And I think if you're going to be a true master coach, this sort of, I don't know, you become more than just an instructor, more than just a coach. You have just little tweaks and things like maybe you've got a silly coloured helmet. My business cards are shiny. The ski poles, I've got, I deliberately mismatched the baskets and the poles, so they stick out like a sore thumb. And like one of the things I did with my coaching group is we played the clothes peg game, which if you've not played it is you take something you would peg your clothes to a washing line with, but you try and attach it to somebody like their jacket or something when they don't notice, which especially if you're coaching a bunch of like 8-year-old kids is hilarious. Can you just imagine about 8 kids all trying to clothes peg random customers in the lift line without them noticing? And then they sit down the chairlift and they're like, what's this? They got a clothes peg. There's a little kid just going and things like that, just a little bit of theatricality, a little bit of silliness. Another example would be there's a sun cream you can use that cricketers use, like really thick sun cream, like zinc oxide, but it's coloured. And so I got a bunch of that when I was coaching out in California because it's so sunny. And we do like blue around the lips. And so there's these, I had like 8 kids, all with like green sun cream on their cheeks, like blue lips, and like a pink nose, going around clothes pegging everyone. And, it was really silly, but it made a real connection. And it was a bit of theatricality. And with kids, that would work really well. But maybe with a 55-year-old, I don't know, engineer, that style of theatricality wouldn't work as well.
Yeah.
So, the idea is to just try and develop a sort of not being fake. That's not what it's talking about. But there's a sort of air of something special has happened. And I think I'm sure all of us have experienced somebody of that type of person, and it really there's something going on. it's more than just the elements. There's an air of flair to them, and Bane is a good, powerful ally, powerful example of that. And that brings us to the end of our session. And I think it's worth considering going forward just how much we all get out of teaching snowboarding and skiing. You know, for me, it's a big passion of mine, the actual sport itself. I enjoy doing it. But I get a lot out of, as this guy Tom did. He's dead now, but he's an amazing coach from what everyone said. And he just loved coaching, and I do enjoy coaching and instructing, use those terms loosely. And that is why I think it's important for us to try and steal from the best, pick particular things that we like the look of, adjust it as needed for our own particular scenario, and then put it into practice. Expect that it might not work the first time, but you adjust accordingly. And there's 3 ways of going about it: trying to make situations happen where deep learning occurs, inspiring people, not just you, but showing them examples of others, pardon me, that are going to inspire them, keep them inspired, and master your coaching skills so that you can deliver the best sessions possible. So I'll stop the slide deck there, and feel free to jump in with any comments, questions, or suggestions.
That was really good. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. That was really good.
Cheers, Carl.
Oh, spot is awesome, James.
Thanks, Ronnie.
I've got a couple of things for you. Number one,
cool. Ronnie,
music.
just quickly, you're a bit faint. I don't know if it's just me or everyone else is getting you coming through quite faint.
Have you earphones in or anything?
I do. I've got. Is it better if I hold this a bit here? Does that work better?
I don't know if you maybe try taking them out, because you were better other times when you didn't have earphones in.
I'm just struggling sometimes to tell what you were saying exactly.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
Sweet, cool. First one, kind of on topic. With music, you mentioned that you weren't, hadn't done as much music.
Almost none.
A really specific thing just for James, I guess.
Yeah.
But maybe for other people, like I love playing music, and so particularly for James, but it might be useful for other people. If you want to start getting involved, percussion is a great place to start. Not that I'm a great
things
musician.
that make noises, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's things like a baran, or that's Austrian spoons. I don't know if you've seen these.
I have not heard of them.
So it's like playing, the sort of country and western spoons, like 2 metal spoons.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier. So like the learning curve to get from, like, you could play these by just getting the 1 of 4 beats, like just like that, and then you can build from there. And then there's kind of more sort of interesting, fun techniques, and actually quite a lot of sort of showmanship you can do, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's a great place to start, and a really fun way to do it as well, of making it not just a kind of a sort of dry learning exercise. Is if you get yourself up when things open up again, is get yourself up to the Clackegg on a Sunday night for the folk session. Rock up with a bit of percussion, or see if you can borrow something, a djembe or something,
right?
And just get involved. It's a good way to start.
If I was to learn a musical instrument, in case anyone's interested, I was thinking of trying the harmonica, because you can just pocket it and bring it anywhere. And if I'm feeling low, I can sit in a lawn chair and play them blues, and just the idea of sort of like just this old hillbilly guy, like them blues. But just because it's pocketable and you can take it anywhere.
Totally. If you get a couple, and then you can ask people what key they're playing in, and then you just pick out the one that tells you which key is right for the.
Something for the future, but at the moment, my passions are used elsewhere currently. But maybe something for the future.
Yeah. The other things I was wanting to say was just something that kind of sprung to mind with the topic of the talk overall is it was a CEO of a national agency. He's quite a forward-thinking kind of guy, and he was saying that something he prioritizes doing, I don't know if it's every month, maybe just every couple of months, is that he tries to arrange a meeting with somebody really unlikely, you know, in a totally different industry, where you just wouldn't imagine that there would be any common bond, and saying that, you know, pretty much every time comes away from the meeting just by having this creative approach of seeing where the dots are, joining the dots, comes away from these meetings with some really super useful, game-changing idea from just having an open mind and not thinking like, oh, you know, we're, you know, in terms of technique. So, for example, if as skiers and snowboarders, one of the most obvious places we could look for common threads, as well as the learning style stuff, which can come from anywhere. But in terms of technique, we'd say, oh well, rollerblading and skateboarding are very similar. Yeah. But not just in terms of like, where do we look to creatively swipe from? Just kind of look everywhere. Just as a thought there. The other thing I was going to say was, just sort of thinking about creatively swiping from snow sports for other things. So something I'm like, I suppose like a lot of us were getting out on bikes now that trails are getting drier and things. I'm kind of have come quite late to mountain biking. I didn't mountain bike a lot as a kid. I usually went out rollerblading. Trying to get the feeling of skiing on a bike and apply the lessons from skiing to riding a bike. It's kind of an interesting thing. I definitely, if there's, I don't know if Rich or other people who are into bikes, it might be an interesting to look at there.
Well, I think if you can bike, you can ski.
Yeah.
And so many people bike, and bikes are often more expensive than skis.
Yep.
I was saying this to somebody the other day, especially nowadays, your average decent bike is far more expensive than some used skis, say. And there's so many people that are bikers, constantly bike. Nothing wrong with it, but nobody sees cycling as elitist, generally speaking. But we see skiing and snowboarding as elitist, even though, at least in theory, they're cheaper. I know that the difference is you've got to buy a lift pass. In theory, you can bike anywhere, but still, it's worth considering. And
I don't know if it's because more people cycle altogether, more people cycle than they do. For instance, my wee cousin is just trained as a PT, and she's also a swimming instructor.
Yeah.
And she was talking about like we sat today, it was my uncle's birthday, and we were talking about how going back to things, and she was talking about the amount of money she spent on like different courses, even during lockdown. And I was like, oh, I felt I was spending a lot of money being a ski instructor, but I feel now even during lockdown you've spent more money than I've spent, and that was doing like online PT stuff. Yeah. And it's just kind of brain frying. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the stereotypes. And it's just dead weird.
It's things like the world we live in 2021 is blended learning, mix of online and offline learning is just the way that the future will be. And if we're, how could we apply that to our customers? How much could we coach them a certain percentage before they arrive? And then same if we're learning to be an instructor, how much could we pick up online before we even get to an event? And so more of the event is spent riding, or it's a shorter day, so there's less chance of things mixing and stuff. And I think just the idea of creative swiping, we've all probably done it at some point in our lives, but it's just a sort of a definition of it. And then I picked the example of that book. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm often working alongside some other coaches, and sometimes you notice somebody doing something, you're like, genius, I'm having it.
I think if I can say one other thing that came up was, so thinking about when we went into lockdown, it was one person in particular who was I was out in Austria with, and was kind of like, oh, what am I going to do now? I don't have any skills. All I know how to do is teach skiing. And I was like, hang on a minute, like you've got all sorts of skills from teaching skiing. And I don't know if other people have the same sort of thing of, you know, maybe having a season or two where you're in another job or you know, looking at summer jobs, whatever. And, you know, in an interview, you know, even though on paper I might have sort of some more relevant experience that I could bring up, I find myself constantly having the best examples to show myself in the best light from experience as a ski instructor than any other aspect. So yeah, just that kind of what can we take from our experience as instructors outside of that as
like,
well.
I had a job interview for ASDA before I got ASDA, and all my questions, the questions they asked me, were all to do with skiing. Like, it was, you know, the kind of questions you go, how would you deal in this situation? It was all to do with skiing, and it was like, should it really be like that? Because it was like, I can't even think of the questions on the spot, but it was all to do with skiing, and I was like, are they going to understand this because they're not skiers? But I felt like that was, everything was revolving back to skiing, and I feel I've probably now been working in ASDA, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months during the pandemic. I've got more being a ski instructor than I have actually working in that job, and it's mad to think, because I would never have thought that. I feel like I'm saying, to get what I'm saying all the time, but it's weird because you wouldn't think you would have got that experience from being a ski instructor, but you really do. Now I've got more life skills and working in a like retail job. It's mad. It's really mad.
I think it's people's attitudes, and I mean, I think sometimes it just comes down to sour grapes. It's like, you know, people kind of dream about, like, they've seen like Shally Girl or whatever, and they're like, what do you mean that's your job? How dare you?
How dare you have fun while working?
But it's like, I think it's a bit. I think I used to kind of have that sort of thing of like, oh, you know, this is like an office job. Like, can I talk about ski instructing? But I think, like, but you know, now I think actually, just you should really just value it, and if you do have people who kind of try to sort of put down the idea of being particularly a ski and snowboard instructor, maybe people would have, you know, a less dismissive attitudes towards, like, you know, more traditional sports, perhaps.
Well, it's worth considering that the reputation we've got has come from some people just coasting, you know, like a certain person will remain nameless that I did a season with. Main purpose of being out in Tahoe was to party like mad, and got kicked out of every casino in Tahoe. And he was there for, you know, as much as possible a free ride. But if you're day in, day out trying to think, oh, how can I tweak this for this customer? I wonder how their brain works. What if I try that? You're constantly firing those circuits in your brain to be able to analyze things. Like I'm studying part-time management course, and a lot of the people on the course found it really challenging. I have too, but I think a big advantage I've had is that I've studied a lot of, you know, like you get, especially in America, you get, I've got my virtual screen on, but you know, I've literally got about 12 manuals here, and I've read most of them. You know, if you want to pass your written exams, you kind of have to. So I've kept learning, which means now that I'm doing more learning, I've already got that sort of part of my brain that looks at things, adapts, adjusts, and incorporates into sort of working life. It's already been developed from that process. And just being able to verbally converse, like words come out that make sense to people, that's increasingly a rare skill, is proximity verbal interaction of a complex thing succinctly. Soft skills are worth their weight in gold, I think. And progressively, as we go into the, say, 2030s, they'll be rarer and rarer.
I don't even think we'll be talking. I don't even know what in the 2030s. I don't even know, man. I don't even want to think about it.
We'll do, what's his name, the Scottish act, James McAvoy playing Dr. Xavier.
Yep, that's what it'll be like.
Now they know how to ski.
Exactly.
I think just sort of thinking about what you're saying earlier, I think probably one of the main things I'd taken kind of from an early start. I mean, after a short stint in a cafe, I went straight into ski instructing for the winter seasons, and is having that sense of autonomy and being capable, so that even when you are then forced to go and do something where you are the bottom of the pile, and you have somebody breathing down your neck and it's very prescriptive, is that you don't have that feeling of just being a lackey. And I think, yeah, just that self-confidence and feeling of being capable and autonomous is something that I think if people are stuck in a kind of a low-ranking job and don't have that, I think it's something that people can have sort of beaten out of them over their working lives.
So, for instance, when I went in my season, everybody'd all skied since they were the age of like 3, and I found it really difficult because I hadn't learned till I was a lot older. So I found it really difficult because they all knew how to ski moguls, and they'd all been on ski holidays from the age of basically since they could walk, and I found that really difficult because they made it known to me that was the way they were brought up, and they didn't make me really feel outsider. Like, they weren't nasty about it, but I knew that I was different.
You had a lot of catching up to do.
They weren't nasty about it, and it really wasn't nice. Even though my trainer said really nice things and he was really positive about my skiing, that wasn't what counted to me. It was more because of the way I'd been brought up, which made me feel really inadequate. And I think that's with the whole kind of skiing thing, that needs to get, like, I think you could get a lot of really good skiers if that whole kind of opinion was to go.
Yeah.
Because it was for that was really horrible for me, and I've got a strong personality, so I could deal with that. But if that was somebody that didn't have a strong personality, I think they would go, do you know what, patch this. I'm not going to bother trying. And that's what I think is a really hard thing, and that's what's kind of is. I think it is to do with like money and background and where you've came from when you've not come, which is really, I think that's the really horrible thing about the sport, and it should be.
I think there's certainly a section of it like that. Like, when I first started to learn to ski at Bellahouston, the guy I got lessons from was this old boy who hated snowboarders. He didn't know that I was a snowboard instructor who was taking ski lessons, and I worked at the same place, and he'd mouth off repeatedly about snowboarders. And I was inside, I was like, it's just almost funny, like what he thought snowboarders were like. They're a different person or something, some kind of different breed of human. And but he was proper old school, we learned this task, then we learned this task, we do the task again until it's perfect. And it was almost fun to try that completely different style with a guy that actually seemed to hate snowboarders and snowboarding and anything with the word snowboard in it. And we learned these specific things, but it didn't really make me want to learn skiing. I already wanted to learn skiing, and then he was my route to getting it. But if it was make or break based on him, it would have been break. No, I'm out. No. So definitely, the sooner we can lose things like that, the better. I'll just pause, stop the recording.